You're listening to sermons from La Cañada Congregational Church and Pastor Kyle Sears. Join us in person every Sunday at 10 a.m. in La Cañada for worship. You can find more information about our church online at lacañadachurch.org.
So when I was a kid, one of our local restaurants would give away a free ice cream cone if you had straight A's on your report card. And so my pursuit of perfection began, because an A was good, but an A plus was better, and a flawless 100% was the best of all. And with a twin brother to compete against, a sense of abandonment from my absent father, you get this strange cocktail of perfectionism and this chasm of shame if anyone found out that you weren't exceptional all the time. And then I meet cheerful people and think, what is your problem? So for me, happiness does not come natural. I have to find it and work at it and cultivate it. Our text today starts by describing one of these aspects of happiness, not this fleeting sort that comes with a free ice cream every 6 weeks, but instead this lasting joy that comes from a heart at peace. This is Psalm 32, verses 1 through 7. Happy are those whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Happy are those to whom the Lord imputes no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. While I kept silent, my body wasted away through the groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer. And then I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not hide my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore, let all who are faithful offer prayer to you. At a time of distress, the rush of mighty waters shall not reach them. You are a hiding place for me. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with glad cries of deliverance. And so at the beginning of this psalm, there is a thoroughness in the description of the ailment that the songwriter once felt. Iniquity, transgression, sin. It's comprehensive in the descriptors that it uses, so much so that we're not really aware if it's one sin or many, intentional or accidental, moral or ethical or something else entirely. What is evident is that the psalmist has taken inventory with deep introspection and evidently deep discomfort. But that's not the primary focus of this song. Instead, this song is one of both praise and instruction. I found happiness, and you can too. Happy are the ones who, is how it begins, or older translations might say, blessed are the ones who. That sense of God's favor has been visited upon you, and that sense of blessing is this now abiding reality that you have found. That God has forgiven me and not stuck me with a label of broken, sinner, guilty, rejected. But we have to flash back to a time when happiness was not their condition. Instead, what we find is emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual burdens as all that they had known, a hand weighing heavy upon them. And this might be the place where we begin to come on board to the song, for those of us that find cheerfulness hard to come by. That we identify with those who want to sing the blues, because it feels like someone gets us, understands what we can't seem to put into words. And so we'll join in the song that says, sometimes life isn't quite the way we hoped it would be. And the first hint of the reason for this crushing weight that is felt is the singer's silence. And that when it comes to silence, it's not just the sins that we keep to ourselves. I think often that sense of burden that we can feel is because we are silent about our trauma or our shame or our feelings of inadequacy that have been put upon us. For me, no one ever told me I wasn't good enough. I just drew that conclusion on my own. That was before I came to faith. But I was thinking, even in the midst of my faith, in those early days and years where I heard messages that God was very displeased with me all the time. Now, of course, God would forgive me, but it only felt like God did that because, I'm God, I guess I have to. Throw in some East Texas stoicism, and it's pretty easy to not really investigate why you feel depressed all the time. Thank God I moved to LA and started therapy because it's sort of expected out here, at least compared to East Texas. And confession and just talking, just naming what I had come to know, started a pathway towards self-understanding and healing, a path that I am still on. And so for the psalmist, confession becomes the key to finding joy. That the forgiveness given by God unburdens the weight of guilt and shame and hopelessness. Sometimes we can find that forgiveness coming by way of understanding that God knows that we are human, after all. It's not like our missteps are some sort of shocking surprise to the God of all things. Sometimes the way we come to forgiveness is in redemption, where God brings good, even from the bad, transforming our errant path into a trail of hope. Sometimes our forgiveness comes as we grow in our compassion, as we are sent among those who are living through what we once experienced. That our heart goes out to them and we might then guide them through the same journey we've been on. But essentially, at the heart of confession is naming reality as God would see it. That includes our own sins and transgressions, those times where we failed to walk the path that God leads us on. But I want us to also understand that confession can also mean more than just our faults. It can also mean naming the reality of systems or histories that prevent us and others from flourishing. The idea of generational trauma and systemic injustice that holds people back from truly finding the life that God desires for them to have. But when we name the reality as God would see it, it also means recognizing just how forgiving God is, how gracious and merciful and enduringly compassionate God can be. It can be naming also the humanity of other people, how they are also prone to self-protection or unkindness that slips out in moments of exhaustion. Not so that we can excuse abusive behavior, but instead so we can find a way to receive the grace to heal when we have been wounded by others. That we can understand that it's not just us that are human, it's everybody. It's difficult for me to accept grace, I got to tell you. In fact, my therapist is like, what would you say to someone who just said what you said? I'm like, it doesn't apply to me. I try to offer it freely to others. I don't like being wrong, even though I often am. I don't like admitting I am wrong, even though I often am. I try to do it, though. I try to admit that I'm wrong. I don't do it enough, but what I know is that God desires our flourishing. Not in the sense that we're happy all the time in this sort of ignorant state of bliss, but instead true flourishing that allows us to be who we have been shaped to be. That in God's recognition of even our flaws, that we are not cast aside as imperfect and therefore undesirable, but instead recognized that even in our unique shaping, we have been brought into this life with God. We've been called to live into the abundance of all that God has made, and that includes the abundance that exists with one another, as imperfect as they can be. This call to flourishing, to blessedness, to happiness, is a call that recognizes how we might make tomorrow better. Not perfect, but better. And I think that's where confession picks up. In fact, the psalmist says, then let the faithful pray to God. That this invitation to confession, to leaving silence behind, is an invitation into the community of creation that God has made. In contrast, the wicked, imagine that they are alone. They are silent because they have no one to speak to. No friend or family or close confidant, and certainly not God. And if they are alone in this world, then it makes sense that they would just devour anyone among them, desperate for the finite instead of the infinite. One of the ways that we are pulled out of that mentality, that it's us against the world, is when we confess the reality as God sees it. The faithful are saved, we're told, delivered from this rush of mighty waters that is meant to evoke images of the Exodus, of the hiding place where God protected Moses as they journey as a people to the promised land. Ultimately, in our imaginations, we think of heaven, that's the salvation that is called for, but even though we're rescued from the finality of death and into the reality of life, we experience salvation in forgiveness every day. Not just the forgiveness that we receive, but in that reception, it trains our heart to be more forgiving of others as well. Not just papering over it with an "it's okay, don't worry about it, it's fine." While we still harbor that resentment, but instead we understand that so often the world around us is just churning with unnoticed cycles that have been inherited. That instead we are plunged further into our humanity as God sees us for who we are, and we see the world around us as God would. For all of the complexities of human emotions, I believe God does want us to be happy in a way that sustains us even when we are not happy, when we're grieving or worrying or hurt. That there is something underneath all of that that reminds us that forgiveness rushes over us and protects us. The psalmist is sharing a way that we might unburden ourselves from that weight of carrying it alone, that we might recognize the God who would even become human as we are, so that that weight might be shared, that we are never alone in silent struggle. And so one more modern hymn writer has instead said that now we can see God face to face, both known and knowing. That inherently in our relationship as humans with the divine is a relationship built on communication and communion. So we are never alone and therefore never forced to be silent. We are loved and renewed and forgiven.